We're delighted to have you all back with us. Please welcome today's lead sponsor, keynote speaker, VP and CCTO for Security Technology at Akamai, Charlie Guerreau.
Morning, everyone. A little bit about me. My name is Charlie Guerreau. I'm the Vice President and CTO of Akamai Technologies. My background is largely academic. It's in the space of applied mathematics, cryptography, and distributed algorithms. And I have been at Akamai for about 19 years. Slides changing? I don't think the slide, oh, here we go. A little bit about Akamai. We are one of the largest compute and security platforms in the entire world. We have roughly 1,200 plus terabits of capacity, and we're in roughly 4,350 different edge POPs. We're basically everywhere applications are. So today, when you go to access a website or use an app on your phone, oftentimes you're actually accessing our systems on servers that are within the same city as you. We're within 1,200 plus networks around the world, 700 plus cities, 130 countries, and we offer 24/7 support. We are one of, not widely known, but one of the top 5 security vendors in the entire world and the largest CDN on the planet. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about the vast mesh of interconnected processes that run within your environment and the kind of threats that they expose. Because Akamai has such coverage around the planet, both within enterprises and externally, we actually see some interesting statistics on a daily basis. And one of those is, within your environment, every server tends to access or have about 530 persistent connections open to it at any given time. That means every server well deep inside your environment, not just servers exposed to the internet that people are accessing, but just any kind of processes, Kubernetes, VMs that you have running that you think are firewalled off, generally have about 530 active connections at any given moment. And that's usually for services. This is how microservice architectures work today. It's sort of a modern architecture. And the way they do that is they expose APIs that those interconnected processes can talk to each other over. And within the customer environments that Akamai deals with, which are both government environments as well as retail and commercial, we generally see about 15,000 APIs inside your environments on a daily basis. Many people don't realize that, but these are all open API connections. And generally in the environments we're in, we see that people can access those APIs directly. There's usually very little authentication or process controls associated with them. And that's, again, just behind the firewall. That's not the APIs that are exposed externally to the world, as well as the regular web services and other things that you might have running for the public to access. And that represents a pretty big threat surface. As a matter of fact, we also see roughly 48 million average daily bot attacks on those infrastructures per customer per day. So every single day, every one of our customers on average has about 48 million attacks happening externally, as well as breaches that take hold internally and then move laterally. This is a huge problem. And it's not like you can just turn this off, right? Microservice architectures and APIs are kind of the way things are structured today. It's how we get things done. So you want to enable this creativity. You want your business and your internal systems to prosper and work, and you want your developers to be able to move quickly, but this represents a massive threat vector that people are taking advantage of. So how do we secure this? So at Akamai, we think of this in terms of 2 dimensions. The first is, are you allowed to talk in the first place? Those APIs represent a vast spectrum of things that can actually be done. So we see things like identity services, we see database services, we also see the badge readers and the door locks that you have in your system are often driven through APIs. There's no real reason why a database process maybe should be talking to the badge reader API, where you can lock down the system or your actual building and cut off access. So the first question is, how do you figure out what processes, what running programs, what servers, VMs, what pods inside of your environment can talk to each other, and how do you just stop that access altogether right away? Firewalls don't really do this well, especially in a Kubernetes-based world where you have pods talking to each other on interconnected meshes and VMs living inside of the same machine potentially. It's not like you can just throw a big iron box there. Not that firewalls don't have use, but they're really not granular enough to tackle that problem. And the next problem, or the next dimension to think on, is once you know that two things can talk to each other, how do you ensure that they're saying the right thing? Because as an attacker, if I breach a system and I get a hold or access to one component in a microservice that should be allowed to talk to others, I can now kind of say whatever I want. And so maybe that lends itself to attacks on the API itself, especially if the API hasn't been structured particularly well or if the developer has left gaps or holes in it. So those are the two pieces that we tend to think of. Should you even be allowed to talk? And then once you can talk, how do you inspect and make sure that you're saying the right things? In the Akamai ecosystem, and pretty much the entire ecosystem on the planet when we're talking about interconnected meshes and things talking to each other, that generally falls into two buckets. And in this diagram, they're the rightmost two. At the far right, we talk about malware, lateral movement, ransomware, data exfiltration. Again, this is really about lateral movement. What can talk to what, and how do you reduce that risk surface? And for us, we think of that in terms of microsegmentation. So we have a product called Guardicore that does microsegmentation, but in general, you should think about microsegmentation as really what processes are allowed to talk to what other processes, what individual running applications can speak to other applications. And to do this well, you really have to understand what applications do talk to each other. You probably have hundreds of thousands of processes running on any one of your given machines at any given time. How do you know which of those are allowed to talk to each other? How is the application structured? So you should work with a vendor or internally have large data sets that let you know in general around the world what are the things that do get to talk to each other. You have certain applications deployed. Does it tend to talk to the database server? Does it talk to an identity system on the back end? If it doesn't talk to a badge reader, well, then maybe you should automatically install rules that drop the packets from moving off of the system or in between those. And that's generally done in a microsegmentation system by installing software, not hardware, that controls what processes can talk to each other, usually at a kernel level. Moving one step to the left from this, we have API security. And API security answers the second question, that second dimension, are they saying the right things? And this is really around behavioral analytics. API security generally sits and looks in between the communication patterns and at the actual data that's being sent, and it learns the structure of your applications, what your developers have set up. Without having Swagger files or anything specifically declared, API security with AI can kind of learn the structure of an application and then determine this should have authentication on it. Or this call only takes data that was returned from a prior call, and if somebody tries to put random injected data inside of it for something like Ebola attack, block it. Once you have those two pillars done, you're now controlling what can talk to each other and how they can speak to each other. And arguably, that's the most, in our opinion, important threat vectors to cover today. But it's not everything. In our stack or spectrum, or the set of layers we think about security, there are two broad-based additional buckets you should think about. One is bot-based threats and app exploits. This is really, once you have your internal systems protected, there's still going to be things that you might not know, 0 days that occur. So can you partner with somebody that has an understanding of who the bad actors are? Not just what the exploits are, but who the bad actors are. Does your partner have something like a client reputation database and know that these IP addresses have been involved in an attack 10 minutes ago on a different customer, and now they're trying to talk to you? We might not know that the data they're sending is an attack yet or represents an exploit, but you probably don't want that threat actor talking to you. So think of that as outside-in protection. And then, of course, things like DDoS attacks and DNS attacks, things that are designed to take your infrastructure offline. We also have products around that, like Prolexic, for example. Can somebody throw enough traffic at your links to take you offline and just stop people from accessing you? Forget about the exploits, but just a denial of service altogether. Or can they attack your DNS infrastructure and do interesting things like repoint you to different servers, which we also find quite a bit. Now, this wouldn't be a talk if I didn't include AI, even for a brief session. It's like we have to talk about this every day. I find AI a really weird topic. There's a lot of clickbait on this, like AI is living alongside of us, it's going to take all of our jobs. There's the real fear, which are AI-based attacks doing something interesting to your infrastructure. And then there's real benefit, obviously, through automation and LLMs and generative models. Today, the reality of what we see, and I'd be curious to talk to some of you after this talk later and find out what you see, we really see generative AI being used in two contexts with most of our customers. One is around code generation. I'm not going to cover that today, but wow, there are some studies out showing that roughly 50% of all the code generated by the large language models today have some sort of exploit inside of it, or some gap that's missed. So think of that as something that extends developer productivity, but maybe not something that replaces your developers. You really, really have to have that code inspected by humans. The other place we see it is around things like chatbots or humans interfacing to your site. And in that world, that really is the same sort of paradigm that we've seen before. It's just AI is sort of a more advanced API. You should think of AI for large language models and generative systems that you expose on your sites as really just being an advanced API. Instead of sending something like XML or JSON, now you're allowing human or natural language interfacing to it. And of course, you should have something like an AI firewall, which is sort of advanced API security that looks at the structure of the prompts that are being sent in and make sure that data is not being exfiltrated. And then finally, briefly, what should you think about the future of security? If you're covering that east-west traffic and you're looking at the data itself and ensuring that it's correct, and you have all the other boxes checked, we really see the future of security being shift left. We believe in that very much so at Akamai, which means getting into the code itself. These are things like ASPMs and CNAP and DAST and SAST. You want to stop bugs that your developers are creating before it actually makes it to the public. So things that integrate into your coding environments. Or like an ASPM, something that would let you know that a particular bug that's found externally or an attack that's happening relates back to a specific check-in. It's that cycle time to get back to the developer as rapidly as possible so that they can put a fix in place. And that is it. Thank you.
Now, to chair our ecosystem panel, Cyber Essentials, Getting the Basics Right, please welcome the NCSC's COO, Felicity Oswald, OBE.
Good morning, Manchester. It's so exciting to be here at CYBERUK 2025. You've heard a lot already this morning, and you will over the next few days, about the evolving threat of cybersecurity and within cybersecurity. Quite a lot of this, though, is about the elite A teams of those who wish to do us harm. Unfortunately, as the National Cybersecurity Centre, we know that even in 2025, basic weaknesses are still being exploited by our adversaries. So arguably, we need to do better against the Z teams of the cyber adversary world too. And that's where this next panel comes in. How to improve the basics of cybersecurity across all of our organizations. Can you join me, please, in welcoming our panelists to the stage? Thank you so much. What an incredible panel I have this morning for this really important conversation. I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves, but at the same time answer our first question. Are we getting the basics right? You'll have your own answers, but I want to hear from the panel. Alan, could you kick us off, please?
Thank you, Felicity. Look, representing Australia, I think the short answer for us in our construct, we've got the Essential 8 program. The short answer is no. I think I'm from the Australian Signals Directorate, and we see a lot of incidents reported to us every day, and the majority of those incidents would be mitigated by basic cyber hygiene. So my answer to you, Felicity, is no.
And Alan Margin from ASD. Thank you, Alan, so much, and great first answer. Rod, over to you.
Morning, thanks Felicity. I'm Rod Latham. I'm the Director for Cyber Security and Digital Identity in the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology in the UK. A long job title. I have to take a pause for breath halfway through. I wish that we could say yes, and then we could probably all go and have a coffee. But my answer is also going to be no. I think we are making some progress. But the risk is that we're advancing at a glacier speed, and the threat is advancing at a wildfire speed, so more to do.
Thank you. Mary.
Hello, I'm Mary Haig. I'm the Global CISO at BAE Systems. And I'd say no, we're not quite there yet. It's too patchy. It's too patchy across organisations. It's too patchy within organisations in terms of that resilience. I think there are too many incidents where organisations can't hold their heads up high and go, do you know what, we did as much as we could have possibly done, and we managed that really difficult incident with grace. Too often it is the basics that are missing.
Thank you. John.
Hi, thank you. I'm John Edwards. I'm the Information Commissioner for the United Kingdom, and my answer also is no. We're not getting the basics right. I mean, anyone who walked past a retail outlet this week would know that. And picking up on the earlier point about whether the response is patchy, sometimes it's not patchy enough. You know, we found Hackney had not patched its systems and compromised huge amounts of very sensitive data. So we're out there trying to raise the standard, issuing fines where we need to get people's attention.
Thank you all. So a unanimous no. I thought there might be a glimmer of silver lining somewhere, but I think we need to, it's a call to action, right? And we need everyone to hear that, both in this room, but if you've signed up to a cybersecurity conference, you might have also said no or maybe rather than yes, and we need to reach other people as well. Rod, can I start with you, please, on the first question? We've heard lots already about the evolving threat. That will be a continuing conversation. How critical is it that UK organisations and supply chains adopt those basic cyber hygiene measures?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I really welcome this panel because, as you said, you know, it's important that we talk about the kind of A-team attacks, the kind of high level of sophistication, as we do. Any attack on CNI by its nature is concern. But we are also concerned about the vast majority of attacks that we're seeing right now, that are having impact right now, that are often lower sophistication. Our statistics from our department indicate we've got about 4 in 10 businesses are attacked in a year, 3 in 10 charities, millions of cyber crimes a year. Each and every one of those you know, is something we want to stop. Each and every one of those has a human impact and it has an economic impact. I think the previous plenary that we heard kind of really brought to life the emotional side of what it's like to suffer a cyber attack. But when you also aggregate all of those attacks up, it's a strategic problem for the UK's economy, and it is a dampener to growth, as Pat McFadden talked about in his session this morning. This is, you know, billions of pounds wiped off the UK economy when you aggregate up all of those attacks, as well as all of the emotional disruption, the kind of confidence that it can give people in setting up their business or charity. So it's really essential that we get the basics right, because actually a lot of those attacks, the majority of those attacks, we know how to stop. We have the solutions. They're just not being adopted at the scale that we need them to be. So we know with Cyber Essentials, which we're going to talk about here in more detail, if you have Cyber Essentials, 92% less likely to make an insurance claim. That's a radical reduction, right? That is having impact at scale. We know from another example of a financial organization that mandated Cyber Essentials in its network. 1,700 organizations got Cyber Essentials Plus, I think, in 6 months, and saw an 80% reduction in cyber attacks in that network. Right? So we know that this works. what we need to do now is drive that uptake.
Thanks, Rod. Really compelling numbers there. John, can I bring you in? How vital is it that we really address these basics? You see these incidents day in, day out.
Yeah, it's essential. I mean, back to your first question, we've seen increases in reports year on year of serious breaches. And the attackers are exploiting a range of vectors, not just the sort of highly technical, as we've seen, having manipulating individual frailties and the like. But it's across the system. It's having patch management. It's being proactive. It's training your staff. But it's also being able to respond in time. We see failures to respond to P1 and P2 notifications in time. One of the things that I've been really staggered about is a failure to maintain traffic logs. You see exfiltrations of tens of gigabytes of data coming out with enormous spikes in traffic that system admins don't even notice, and so they can't act. And there's the basics, I think, back to your opening point, really are being neglected.
Thank you. Mary, can I come to you next? So you're the global CISO of a huge organisation with offices and parts of your organisation worldwide. So you've also got a huge supply chain. Why is Cyber Essentials important to you and to BAE?
So I think sometimes in a big organisation you can go, that's the basics. Of course we've got that nailed. We've got all this fancy technology. But sometimes you make this mistake of kind of having your pudding but not eating your fruit and veg. And really nailing down on, am I sure that I have done all of those basics that Cyber Essentials sets out? Because if there's an attack and it turns out that those basics were missing, it undermines the whole cyber team, it undermines the reputation of the organisation. It's doubly bad. And so there's this real responsibility to go after those basics. And you look at Cyber Essentials, and you do hear big organisations say it's really hard for us, but you can't argue with what it's asking for. In good conscience, it's asking for very, very good things. And so we took the position of using that as a stick within the organisation, a real lever to drive action. And that was about briefing our IT managers, our managing directors of the sectors, our executive committee, our board, that Cyber Essentials was a mandate, a license to operate. We absolutely had to have it. And when you got that agreement and their support for that, which I have to say wasn't difficult when you go in and do the briefs, then everything else flows from that. And so we set up a dedicated vulnerability management team. That was funded, permanent funding in place. They exist. They always will exist. We put a business case to the IT managers and said, is the cost of replacing that obsolete system more than us switching off all the revenue to our government customers? Because government asks for Cyber Essentials as a mandate. And not a single one of them could come back and say yes. So it's a crack on then, replace that system. And what was really interesting is when you really hold that line and when you make that really clear case is that over the couple of years, things begin to measurably shift in the organisation. So if you look at our vulnerabilities on our systems where there's Cyber Essentials in place, 8-fold reduction in vulnerabilities over time. And now you start to look at the other more tricky systems and start to put in place the things you've learned from those as well. So really driving down vulnerabilities in a measurable way that significantly reduces risk. And obsolescence funding didn't used to be called out in budgets. No one ever talked about it. Now it's one of the lines in the budgets. It's non-negotiable. Everyone puts it in. So it's really shifted that position to cyber resilience isn't an optional thing. Cyber Essentials isn't an optional thing. And so it must be in the funding, and we're not going to debate it.
Thank you. And some fantastic quotes there from Mary, which makes sure everyone gives credit to Mary in terms of don't just have your pudding, have your fruit and veg as well. I love that one. So thank you so much. Alan, we've talked a bit this morning about Cyber Essentials. Obviously, that's the UK system. but you have Essential 8 in Australia. Can you tell us about your experiences?
Yeah, thanks, Felicity. I think in the Australian context, we've got the Essential 8, which has been in place for a number of years now. It's symbolically 8 things, but there are a fair few controls that sit behind those 8 straightforward things that we designed for, and essentially designed for Windows on-premises environments a number of years ago. I think what we've found, we've had a lot of success with the Essential 8, almost spectacularly so, because we've found that both government and the private sector have found the concept quite easy to engage with. It's 8 things, they can talk about those. Within those 8 things, we've also broken up into maturity models. So we have various maturity levels and controls that sit within those maturity levels targeted at certain sectors. So we say, maturity level 1 for the vast majority of businesses, and for government, we sort of say maturity level 2 is the right place to be. We found it really successful because boards can grapple with it. Boards can tie themselves around those maturity levels, what they need to be. They can dedicate funding towards it. And we've actually seen organisations, including government, use the Essential 8 as a platform to seek extra funding so it's helped size those in by and large. I think the challenge we've had with the Essential 8 has been that it's had to evolve it over time. It's not set and forget. In our business, the threat actor gets a say on what we say about what controls work, and essentially that has needed to evolve over time to respond to contemporary threats, and that does come at a cost. And some of those costs are not insignificant from a controls perspective, particularly where we see the threat going these days.
Thank you. What lessons do you think we can draw from one another? What are the things that you'd encourage the Cyber Essentials community to learn from your experience with Essential 8, or is there anything you're looking for from us?
Look, I think it's balancing, and potentially maybe we get to this later, it's really balancing the sort of taking a risk-based approach to Essentials. If there are situations that certain essentials or certain controls are not applicable, considering what compensating controls look like, considering what environment you're operating in, really taking a good risk-based approach rather than saying this is the control and this is all it can be. We need to be pragmatic about what we say and how we implement it in our environments.
Thank you. So we've already talked this morning about wake-up calls to organisations that haven't yet got cyber security measures in place. But I'm aware that standing on a stage, people like us, people from the NCSC saying that is one thing. Delivering it in an organisation that has finite budget, where cyber at the moment is a thing that happens only in the IT department, there are legitimate barriers that CISOs or those with responsibility for IT or cyber security will be feeling that's real. Mary, can you tell us about some of your experiences in terms of what those barriers are? And I'd welcome thoughts from others as well.
Yeah, I think the thing that struck me when I first came into this role 4 years ago, and I think it's to an extent still true now, is that if you compare it to finance for a minute, if you walk into a boardroom or the management committee room and you would never hear any of them say, yeah, I don't really understand that money thing. It's quite regular that they'll say, I don't really understand cyber. And when you think about how much technology is underpinning businesses now, that's not all right. And so we've got to play a role of educator as much as we do influencer. So there's definitely a place for, the scary stories, but there's also the place for teaching into the management that cybersecurity is not done by the cyber team. It's done by everyone, and providing the structures, and it doesn't matter too much what those structures are, but you've got to have a framework, NIST or pick your favourite, to say, this is the breadth of it. Because when I came in, I remember in the early weeks, someone walked up to me and said, there's this firewall, and I think the setting's not quite right. So you've got to be joking. That's down in the detail. You've got to get the machine overall working. That's not a conversation that a cyber leader would have. They've got to create the machine to make it all work. So it's not just about firewall settings, it's about the whole piece and making sure that that cyber resilience is right in at the heart of the management committee, and they know the importance of it, and they give you the influence and the funding to go and make that happen. It's the other piece I'd say is tenacity. Don't expect it to be easy and for it to happen overnight. You've got to have multiple conversations. You've got to use multiple people to help you have those conversations and really drive it through, but hold your ground. It matters. You know it matters as cyber professionals. Put that across in an engaging way that brings people to you rather than makes them run.
Thank you. Really powerful. I think the point about it's still weirdly okay in a boardroom to say, I don't really understand technology. You would be fired if you said that as a chief whatever, if it was about money. I'm all for teaching cryptography in business school. I'm still working on that, but if you see that happens, I'm going to claim some credit. John, from a regulator's perspective, what do you see across, are there similarities between organisations that are struggling with this during incidents?
I think Mary makes a really important point that when we focus on the cost of getting to a base level standard of cybersecurity, we don't often look at the counterfactual, the cost of not doing it. And we've seen organisations like the Electoral Commission have their records locked up for a year. As I said, Hackney had files deleted. We find an organisation called Advanced, which is a data processor, which was the first processor we find, £3 million. They offered multi-factor authentication across some of their system, but not all. And for us as a regulator, looking at the kind of data processing that they were doing, the kind of information that was involved, the risks of going wrong, the cost of not doing that was much higher than whatever it was going to cost to roll that MFA out across the whole system. So we find them £3 million. Now that, I hope, focuses the mind on that counterfactual. Yeah,
for sure. Alan, do these experiences resonate with your and ASD's world?
Yeah, it does. I think what we found, we've sort of technically validated and gone in on the ground with some of our government agencies to sort of, assess against our essentials, to see how it's being implemented. I think the perception versus the reality is where agencies are getting caught out. I think they assume that they have got these controls in place, and then when it comes down to technically validating that they don't. So I think it's really important to both, assure themselves that what they've said that they're doing, they are doing. The other thing in our construct is often it's more apparent that it's a cultural issue rather than a technical issue. And what I mean by that is that the control exists, or the software exists, or the solution exists already in the organisation, but there's a resistance culturally to adopting it because it's a business process change, or it's a decommissioning of a legacy system that really is the barrier to improving the actual cyber hygiene or addressing that legacy issue. So more often than not, when we're talking to boards, and talking to the senior executive in agencies, it's really about getting them across the line on the cultural issues, why certain business practices increase cyber risk and certain business practices reduce cyber risk. And ultimately, it's up to an organisation to whether they choose to accept that. And they can choose to accept a higher degree of risk, but it's going in eyes wide open about what risky behaviour looks like.
Those legacy systems, I think every incident responder here, whether in a private sector organisation or public, will definitely would be rich if they had £1 for every time there was an incident where it was the thing that we forgot existed, or it was next on the list to get the treatment. That really chimes with the plenary this morning as well. I wonder if we can get every CFO and CEO of every major organisation to listen to Fionn and others talk this morning, in terms of that was pretty sobering. So that's the things that aren't working. What's the positive? How are we going to get these measures or equivalent measures adopted? Rod, given your role in DCIT, I'd welcome your thoughts on the need, the challenges, and where government is in terms of accelerating adoption.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, as you say, there's no point. We've got those compelling statistics. We can say this stuff works. We know it works. People are not adopting it at the rate that we want them to, that we think they should, that would be good for the economy as a whole. That's on us therefore, to work out what we do about that, because each of those businesses are, rational actors who are trying to do the best for their business. If we're not reaching them and convincing them, we need to kind of think more creatively about how to do so. So there's a number of different things, I think. Part of the challenge is to make the information as easily available as we possibly can. So I think Cyber Essentials does a good job. The NCSC has done a lot of the hard work to then take that kind of framework and put it in an easily digestible form. But there's other things that we're trying to do in terms of codes of practice that we're publishing. So we did one recently on cyber governance for boards, again, because a lot of this is at the board level. So part of it is around getting the information in a good form. Part of it's also then working about where your tools are for having effect. So we know that the biggest driver of uptake of Cyber Essentials is effectively people get it because they have to get contracts. We have the strongest degree of control where I'm sat over government contracts, so we've already kind of mandated that Cyber Essentials in a lot of what we do in government procurement. That then drives change down the chain. We've also been working with high street banks, the construction sector, and others around getting some of the kind of big primes, big organizations who can kind of see the benefit of Cyber Essentials and getting them to drive it in their supply chains. That is what has been driving up the numbers. And by and large, every year is the best year for Cyber Essentials, right? So every year we get more people certified than we had the previous year. We just need it to be bigger and faster and more. So I think it is. There's still. I think there is therefore some cause for optimism, but I don't think put all together what I've just been talking about, it's still that stuff we have been doing. It's still not having the effect. So I think there is some more for us to think about on how do we reach people more? How do we get across that the benefit to them so that people are more see the incentives to it? And I think that kind of, again, thinking about the previous panel and what Mary was saying on how do you get people to feel it a little bit and to think about that counterfactual, but doing that in a kind of constructive way.
Yeah. What are others' thoughts on mandation? It feels like that's a conversation that will be live in all these rooms over the next few days and probably in the evening events too. Government has already mandated it in our collective supply chain. Big organisations are doing it as well. What are thoughts on what are the benefits of mandation and what are the risks?
It's a good idea, but you've got to follow it up. So we mandate it to our supply chain. Where I think, being really honest, we're weaker is if a supplier turns around and goes, we haven't got it, there's a moment where they go, so what are you going to do about it then? And that's the moment where you've got to show your strength, if you can, and go, you haven't got it, so I'm not using you. And the more that you do that, actually, in those sort of cases, it sends ripples. It sends a really clear signal. So one of the things that we've been doing in the last year is getting much, much closer with supply chain. So I've embedded cyber insiders into the procurement teams because I want them to see cyber as front and center right in there when they're contracting. So it's not a last minute, oops, they haven't got Cyber Essentials, too late, never mind. It's right in there early on. If you don't do that, it's without force, really.
Comes back to your tenacity and grit point, right? In terms of what it takes to be a cyber leader. So make the commercial procurement officer your best friend as well. John.
So I'm neutral on the question. I think that's a question for government policy. I mean, the statistics, for example, that Rod gave, that an organisation that is certified is 94% less likely to have an incident. That is absolutely striking. So we will take notice of these, of how organisations are demonstrating their commitment to security. If they're doing that by saying that we are certified with Cyber Essentials, that's great. We'll take note of that. But it's a floor, it's not a ceiling. So, we require organisations to undertake a thorough risk assessment of their own systems and to design their response according to that. in a privacy by design, security by design way. So I wouldn't want any organization to feel that they've got a kind of one and done stamp when what may be required because of their risk profile, because of their the sensitivity of the data they're processing, the number of clients, whatever it is, we would expect a much more sophisticated and higher standard of demonstration of that commitment to security.
Yeah, thank you for that reminder. And I think it brings me back in my head to our transforming resilience isn't just about getting to one place. It's about how we continue to evolve on the maturity curve and ensure there's a path for all organisations to follow that. Alan, can I bring you in terms of mandation and your experiences and what's happened within Australia on the Essential 8?
Yeah, I think we've had an interesting journey. So in the Australian environment, we've mandated the Essential 8 for government agencies up to a maturity level of 2, as I sort of mentioned earlier. That's mandated in our protective security policy framework for government agencies, and each year we, along with our colleague department, report to the Parliament on how government is achieving, how government agencies are achieving against that. I think that the trends there show that some of the larger agencies, and there are some struggles and clear categories where agencies are struggling to meet that standard. And there are obviously some success stories there. So it is shifting the dial, noting the dial keeps shifting because we keep changing the framework because the actor gets a say in all this. I think on mandation, I think the positives we've seen about it is that it really has driven attention from senior leaders, CFOs and CEOs, both from unlocking funding perspective, because a CISO can go to them and say, well, if you give me X amount of dollars, I can achieve a certain maturity level for you, and that will help us do X, Y, and Z. In a private sector construct, that will help them access the defence supply chain, for example, and there's benefits for the agency there. I think there are some downsides that we've sort of seen from mandation, and I think it does sometimes lead to a compliance approach in organisations. It becomes a tick box exercise, which is good for lawyers. I think I'll steal David's comments yesterday. So it's good for lawyers and it's good for compliance officers, and the threat actors like it too, because they know how to sort of build exploits that go around certain controls. And I think it also risks a bit of tunnel vision from CISOs, because they sort of say, well, I only need to do these things, and then therefore that could translate at a board level, saying, well, I'm not funding anything else but these things, because the sets are basically, if government said that, well, this is all you need to do, then all we need to do is these things and nothing else. And that's kind of a very simplistic way of dealing with cyber from a threat and a sort of an attack vector perspective. So it's a challenging issue. I think we've seen the benefits of mandation, but we've also seen some unintended consequences of mandating at a certain level.
You definitely got nods from fellow panellists here. Anyone want to dive in on that point?
I think that's why secure by design matters such a lot, Steve, because I see that all the time, actually, that the fallback to I'll be compliant and that'll be enough, and it can never be like that, never. It's a basic, really good habits piece, but it's not enough. It's You've got to go beyond that, and secure by design is the way that leads to that, constantly thinking about risk, assessing your controls and checking their effectiveness.
Great. Rod, come on.
I was just going to dive in as a bureaucrat who works on legislation. One of the challenges that you have when you're dealing with something like this is the pace at which technology and the threat moves. Yeah. So, even when you're moving as fast as you can with legislation, it takes, years normally from kind of starting the process to doing it. In the world we all operate in, that is a long, long time. So yes, mandating and legislation and regulation is definitely part of what we need to do, and that's why we've got some coming. But you do have to be careful that you don't then set, as I was talking about, like something that then actually is good for the threat actor too, because it gives them a level of certainty around which to plan. So it's part of the solution. It's definitely not the whole thing.
John, come on in.
Sorry, I was just going to give a warning as well that the standards that we administer, what we're looking for when we investigate an incident is, has this organisation adequately secured its data? Now, the answer to that is never going to be yes, because we had Cyber Essentials. Yeah. So we will execute regulatory interventions, and there's a range of them, including fines, against an organisation that has Cyber Essentials certification, but has still failed to meet other standards. We may choose not to intervene in an organisation which has not certified with Cyber Essentials, but is able to demonstrate to us the range of other ways in which they have discharged that statutory obligation to take adequate security steps. So, I mean, I do worry a little bit about, Alan's point that mandating will set a, will limit the aspiration at the board level and will limit the expenditure that is available to securing sensitive data.
So I think it's a hot topic to keep on talking about. We're not going to solve it on this stage here, but it's a live conversation. Organisations that have, whether it's UK government or big defence primes who've insisted on their supply chain upping their game in cybersecurity, are able to point to the successes, but also the drawbacks and the things that take time. Before we move on from mandation, Rod, I'm not going to have you on the stage without asking you about the Cybersecurity and Resilience Bill. The Minister mentioned it, Secretary of State mentioned it earlier. Can you tell us more about the bill and whether it will get into this space in terms of mandation or Cyber Essentials more broadly, or is that too much of an ask too early?
No, well, having just, of course, said that mandating regulation is not the magic bullet, it is extremely important, and we've got some great regulation coming. So we issued our policy statement last month, so people can go and kind of read in more detail some of the things that we are looking to do. And again, I talked about the challenge of how you keep up with the threat when you're passing legislation that moves slowly. We're looking to do as part of that is around giving the Secretary of State powers to do some setting of standards without going back through legislation. There will be checks and balances around that to make sure that is controlled. That will give us the flexibility to look at where we feel that there might have to be minimum security requirements set, and how that might change over time. So it will give certain degrees of flexibility for us to look at that. Again, what we'll be careful to do, though, is not set in stone in primary legislation something that might change. So I don't think that you probably shouldn't therefore expect to see the word Cyber Essentials in a clause in legislation. But what we might be able to do is then think through at a later point how we drive uptake through the tools we are looking to give ourselves later this year.
Thank you. Well, I'm certainly excited. I think it's right in saying it's the UK's first primary legislation with the phrase cybersecurity in the title, which is pretty important. But I did say that to an international counterpart recently, and they just laughed, because that suggested quite how slow this is, given cybersecurity has been a phrase in my agency's title, for example, for 8.5 years, and many of you have been working on it for decades. But anyway, I will take some positives. Moving away from mandation, though, but recognising we've got such a long way to go, what can industry and governments do? How do we work together to really drive this across big and small organisations? I'm hoping one of you might jump in first. Mary.
I think that there's a recognition that the market is quite complex. So some companies serve one big customer. So my company serves a few really big customers. In that case, contractual requirements are a brilliant way to make us do what we need to do. Some customers which serve consumers can't do that, then regulation can be really useful. I suppose what it's saying is you need a smorgasbord of different levers, carrots and sticks, to drive the right behaviours through. But, that phrase that we, I think, always use at this conference is it's a team sport, and it involves companies like mine pushing suppliers to do the right thing, as well as governments pushing to do the right thing. And we've just got to keep going with that. I think there's certain things that we probably underestimate the power of. So to give you an example, there's some changes to corporate governance regulations. So in annual reports, you have to put down your material risks, the controls to your material risks, and whether they're effective or not. That has created way more conversation with the board about cybersecurity than I'm afraid Cyber Essentials did. Both are important, but know which are influencing who, and use them all.
Thank you. Yeah, what a great reminder that that is a really significant change in the last year or so. Fantastic. Rod, can I invite you in next?
Yeah. And I've already spoken a little bit about what some of the work we're doing with different industries, high street banks, construction, to kind of get them to drive down. So I think that kind of private partnership is really powerful. I remember what you said at the start here, Felicity, that probably people don't pay to come to Cyber UK because they don't think cybersecurity is important. So I hope that everyone, or most people in this room, will be advocates for the importance of this. And again, hopefully we can start to get those messages out there, because I don't think always it's that people have, businesses have a full information clarity to make the kind of decisions that they're making about the level of cybersecurity they have. It can be quite hard to get that understanding. So I think us being ambassadors and advocates for the importance of this is really important. And again, I think I would also encourage those who have been through it and suffered it, like we had hearing from the Irish health executive. I think that's really powerful. And again, sometimes that's really hard because people don't want to go and say, we did this and we didn't have this in place and we paid the price. But actually, that sharing of experience, I think, then does just drive up that awareness so people can think, oh, that could be me. And maybe that might just shift a few people to start getting the basic controls that we really want them to have.
Thank you. John?
Thanks. I mean, I think as the regulator, we investigate where things go wrong. And I think, and those investigations are costly. That's an investment for us at the centre. I think it's incumbent on us to communicate what we have learned so that everybody can get the benefit of that investment. And I think it's incumbent on everybody in this room to come to our website, ico.org.uk, and find what were the determinants of some of these significant breaches and how they can avoid them. Yeah. Things like, limiting the number of access attempts or incorrect logins that you have. I mean, what is it going to be, 5 or 10? Doesn't matter. A brute force attack could throw 10,000 credentials at your system, and if you're not logging it, if you haven't then got a multi-factor authentication. So it's understanding what went wrong, communicating to people, and then having the curiosity in the industry to come to investigate, to say, could that happen to me? What steps do we need to take to avoid that? So I think that's something that we are trying to do more of. We are trying to get better at. I think it was Rod who sort of paraphrased my regulatory philosophy, which is the single most important determinant of compliance with any regulation is ease of compliance. And I think everyone in the system has a role to play in making it as easy as possible. And for us, that means communicating the kinds of lessons that we've learned.
Thank you. And your reports are such a fantastic opportunity to have a really in-depth look at, to learn those lessons, as you say. So thank you. Alan, what are we missing here? Are there tricks you can share with us that you've done or you've seen elsewhere in the world?
No tricks, but I will mention a couple of things that have worked in our environment. I think because we've had the Essential 8 in place for a number of years now, what we've actually seen is the market responding to that. And what I mean by that is we've seen cybersecurity companies build tooling and build ways to to demonstrate that how they're meeting their cybersecurity, or assuring themselves they're meeting those cybersecurity requirements within their products and services. And some quite major vendors have been doing that. And I think having those strategic relationships as government and a technical authority like ours with those vendors really has helped drive some of that product in the marketplace. And ultimately, the end game is just to make it easier for network defenders to understand their threats and manage those threats and see where their vulnerabilities are. Not necessarily, strict compliance per se. I think one of the things that has worked really well, and I think the things that we're working together with vendors, and I think we've released something with Microsoft last year, and we continue to work with vendors on things that scale. And I think helping things that scale, the really good example is released a blueprint for secure cloud last year that is essentially a Microsoft E5 configuration guide, because most people in this room are using Microsoft products, and it's basically a step-by-step guide of how to configure it to be a certain maturity level out of the box. And I think products like that and tooling that helps do that at scale has really delivered value for us in our environment. I heard Mary mention before the magic word secure by design. I think where governments really need to sort of hold vendors to account is producing products and software and solutions that are more secure out of the box, that need less management, less vulnerability management from network defenders to be able to get on with other things. Really got to hold vendors to account and reward good vendors for producing good products and services that help make their life easier. I think secure by design, secure by defaults are super important in our construct, and probably the way we're going to address it longer term.
Thank you so much. And I might come back to both you and Mary on the next question as well. One of the challenges we get as the NCSC is, why does every jurisdiction in the world have a different set of the controls? And the honest answer is, why does every country in the world have a different set of X legislation, or why, advice? And we do our best as international security authorities to work together. But of course, I recognise that for global organisations, it's really hard to navigate. Mary, give us the hard truth. Should we be getting our act and gear to work differently? Or how do you navigate this? Have you got any asks of us?
I would love us to put more into negotiating the reciprocity. It's undeniably a lot of extra work to do the mapping for literally no cyber risk reduction. It is just looking at two different standards and going, so they said tomato and they say tomato. And that's not a value-adding activity. I know all the reality about how hard it is to negotiate these things internationally. But the more that we can drive in that reciprocity, the better. It ultimately, as technology becomes more embedded, and we run the risk of it being real noticeable barriers to trade and being used as barriers to trade, actually. So we need, with our allies, to get that reciprocity really working slickly, and it isn't quite yet, but I do know it's really hard.
Thank you for being so candid. I think my team will throw tomatoes or tomatoes at me if I could agree to that on the stage here. But I think that's a gauntlet that you've helpfully thrown down for those of us on the cyber authorities side, that equivalencies are so important, and how do we make it as easy for global businesses to navigate as possible. The one thing none of you said that I'll throw in as Felicity's two penneth worth, if that's all right, before I come to the last question, is I wonder if there's more we can do as individuals. We're all consumers. We all exist in civic society. Many of us have roles outside of work, on school boards or on charities or as non-exec directors of other organisations. And I wonder if there is more we should do to ensure that as many organisations that we come into contact with are aware of Cyber Essentials. So let that be the challenge to anyone that has a role outside of their cybersecurity day job. I'm going to come to the last question because we've only got a couple of minutes left. Could I ask you for what is your key takeaway? You have a room full of amazing cybersecurity professionals. They probably agreed with a decent amount of what we said and probably disagreed with a bit too. But what's the one thing that they could do, or we could ask them to do, or your advice to them to help us on driving up the adoption of some of these really important controls to deal with that Z team of the adversary before we even get to the A team? I'll come to each of you in turn. John, what's our one thing?
Cybersecurity is multidisciplinary. It's not just the tech heads. So, and this goes to the point that I think Mary raised about culture. So we've got to really imbue the culture of our organisations with a sensitivity to the importance of cybersecurity across your legal teams, across your frontline teams, HR training, the whole lot. It's a cultural understanding that is not just left to somebody who has a cyber in their job description.
Thank you so much. All about culture, whole of organisation. Incredible. Mary?
I would use the fruit and veg of cyber as the springboard. Sometimes there's a mistake to say there's so much that we can do and you go into this sort of cycle of doing nothing. You haven't got cyber essentials, get to cyber essentials. Declare it's essential in your organisation. Doesn't matter if someone mandates it or not, and use that to drive real improvement.
Fantastic. Thank you. Rod?
So I think for me, it is the bit around the people. And again, what we're talking about on this panel is not around kind of unknown tech. We have the tech solutions. What we struggle to do is communicate with people who don't understand this, and even the word cyber itself can be a turn-off. So again, for those who are in this community, how do we reach those people who are outside it to land those key messages?
Thank you. Alan?
Very quickly, I think just to double down on what Mary said, the basics matter. Get them right. I think avoid the temptation to go and buy the fancy new emerging tech, so-called silver bullet. I think do the basics and do the so-called unsexy work first in cyber before you worry about buzzwords. Yep.
Thank you. What a great way to end us. Thank you so much to my amazing panel. Thank you to all of you for joining us for this really important conversation about how we transform resilience. Can you join me in thanking our panel, please?
Please scan the QR code to evaluate this session. Lunch will now be served in the exhibition in Central Hall. Don't forget that the lightning talks are on the spotlight stage. The CyberDen and interactive workshops take place during the lunchtime period. We'll see you all later for our afternoon plenary programme.